Hello, everyone, lovely ANR fans and watchers. You are at the UHE booth at the SuperBooth trade show in Berlin 2017. And we're here today and yesterday as well, showing our new synth that's called REPRO-5. This is it right on the screen. It's a sort of polyphonic version of our REPRO-1 that we released last year, which was an emulation of a famous monophonic synth from the early 80s. And as some of you may know, this monophonic synth had a polyphonic sibling that did come out a couple of years before that, in the late 70s. So this is what we have modeled now, and it's, let's say, about 90-95% finished. There's barely any presets yet, but I can show you what we have. Small changes are still going to come. Some of the graphics, some of the sound is still a bit rough around the edges, but I'll try and show you and explain how this is different from our REPRO-1 monophonic synth. All right, so the two most important things that are different, I think, is that with this being polyphonic, there was a desire to have the signal be a bit more than just mono, because the original hardware had a basic mono output, very narrow signal, and we wanted to give the signal more width without having to go into effects. So we put that into the tweaks page that you can see here. It's still a bit rough. It'll get some polish, but it's nice enough already. So we have 8 voices. I realize it's called REPRO-5 and has 8 voices. There might be a contradiction, but 8 voices is much nicer if you want to play pads or polyphonic keys. So each of the 8 voices in this page is represented with a small trimmer, a knob. That's our voice pan. So each voice can have its own position in the stereo field, which means you get a nice wide stereo image just by adjusting each voice without having to go into chorus or reverb. Let me try and give you an example of that. Switch this, turn the effects off so you can hear it a bit better. So I'll play the same note, and hopefully you'll be able to hear how each note has a separate position in the stereo field. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong sound. Let me select the correct one. It's this one, in fact. All right, turn reverb off, turn chorus off. Just play a few notes. Hopefully you'll be able to hear that just the synth note themselves already have a stereo width to them. So this is a very nice addition. And the second thing that people will notice, if you're familiar with the REPRO-1, the monophonic one, is that in this spot right here, it does not say JAWS anymore. It doesn't say Wavefolder anymore. Now it says Velvet. And Velvet is a tape saturation. And it's a tape simulation that we took from one of our bigger plug-in effects. You might know which one. So Velvet is a complete tape simulation that you can now add to the signal, and this knob is a sort of macro knob. It raises the input while lowering the output so that there's not such a huge difference in volume, just a little bit, which also means turning it down means turning down the input, raising the output, and this also raises the tape hiss, the tape noise floor. Let me try and demonstrate. I hope it's very subtle, but I hope you can already hear it, that just this effect with the input turned down raises the tape hiss. You can use this, of course, with a high input, which gives the sound a very nice round tape saturation, like a tape being driven with a very hot signal. Let me try and give you an example. Let's just use that sound, turn it down a bit here. Raise the gain before the tape, and let me see. Oops, this might be a bit loud for the video, I'm sorry. I hope you can hear the fluttering and the mumbly and hissy sound. This is a tape being driven super hard, like with a 18 dB of gain after the synth. You can hear how the tape makes gives a very buzzy, gnarly, nasty sound to the signal. And as this tape effect might be a bit subtle for some people, we also included a distortion unit, and that is now per voice. So it's not included in this post effects section, but it's actually in each voice. Each of the 8 voices has its own little distortion unit after it, before everything goes into these global effects. That means that you can set up a variation of the distortion for each of the voice by, for example, using this modulation source, which sets a voice, a spread, an offset, a value offset for each voice that you offset for whatever you route it to. And if you use this offset for the distortion amount, that means each voice now gets a distinct amount of the distortion you set up, and you can hear this effect in the sound that I am hopefully selecting now. Okay, this is the sound, and I've changed the distortion to the bit crusher mode, so you'll hopefully be able to hear how each note I play will have a different amount of bit crushing. So some notes have this crystalline sheen because the bit crush is very high, like these notes. And some notes only have a very subtle amount. So this is an advantage of having the distortion unit per voice, have it, so to say, 8 times in the synth, behind each voice. So the stereo width and the replaced distortion effects are the main ingredients of this new polyphonic REPRO-5. Other than that, we stuck to the hardware original, of course, in that some of the modulation that's happening on the left side is also in the same way different as the polyphonic hardware was different to the monophonic one. The Unison that existed on the original hardware can, of course, now go up to 8 voices, not just 5. 8 voices makes it a bit thicker, and the slop parameter that we have here causes, when you use it in unison mode, causes a detune of the unison sound, which gives it a very thick, wide. We try to set it up. So without unison, the sound would sound one key. Without unison, let's turn it on. So now you have these 8 voices playing in unison, and turn up the... You can hear how wide and how detuned and how alive this can get. All right, interesting is that with it being a polyphonic instrument, we wanted to include a sort of playability into the surface without the user having to use a modulation matrix too much. So velocity sensitivity is now part of the envelopes. You adjust it with these little trimmer pots. So each envelope now reacts to velocity through these trimmer pots. Trimmer screws. Give you an example. The advantage is that you're not cluttering up your modulation matrix. You can use the modulation matrix for sound design stuff, for interesting features. And actually, let me stick to the sound I already have. You'll probably be able to hear it. Let me turn up the velocity sensitivity, and like in a proper good modern synth, it reacts to velocity, and we put that in the envelopes. Everything else, or most of the other stuff, is very similar to the Repro one. There'll be lots of fine-tuning still to this synth, as the filter does sound a bit different than the Repro 1 filter, or it will sound a bit different. So there's a couple of, there's lots of fine-tuning still ahead of us, but that's mostly it. The tweak page is already there in its basic form. It'll also get some reworking, of course. filter envelope. That might be interesting. Filter envelope is now invertible. There's still a graphical error in there. There's just supposed to be a minus and a plus, but now you can invert the filter envelope, flip it, so the movement goes down instead of up, and that's a nice addition. Also, you will be able to use microtuning files if you play in different scales, which some people do, and it's very interesting for them. We will include a number of microtuning files, but you'll also be able to load your own. And lastly, I want to mention that, let's go back to the main page. The original hardware had the option of blending between LFO and noise for certain types of modulation, as you can see here. You can use a blend of LFO and noise. And while it's nice enough to have the noise felt a bit limited to us, and we made that switchable under the hood. Let's go under the hood. So now you can, instead of noise, you can have sample and hold, and use, let's go back to the front, use a blend of sample and hold or LFO for this type of modulation. And it sounds like you would expect from a sample and hold function. And yep, that's about it. That's our REPRO-5. It's about 95% done. Still get some presets and some beta testing, and we hope to have it in about 2-3 months. And yeah, that's it for me. Thank you very much for your attention.